The unemployment rate declined to 33.9% in the April to June quarter. That compares with a rate of 34.5% in the January to March quarter. The number of unemployed people rose by 132,000 to 8 million. According to Stats SA data, 648,000 more jobs were gained in the second quarter compared to the first quarter. The biggest gains were seen in the community and social services, trade, finance and construction sectors, while losses were observed in manufacturing and transport. As at the end of June, some 15.6 million people were in employment. Now, to unpack the latest data for us, I'm joined by Dr. Azar Jammine. He's Chief Economist at Econometrix. Thank you very much, Azar, for joining us. What are the key takeaways that you've taken from the report, which came out about an hour and a half ago?
The first takeaway that I take is the fact that most of the new jobs that are created that were surprisingly strong were in the services sectors of the economy. And this is, to some extent, I think, a reflection of the economy gradually moving out of the lockdown phase, less need for social distancing, more interaction, people going to restaurants, going on holiday, and involving themselves in services activities to a far greater extent than was the case when lockdowns and social distancing were being imposed. The second factor that is relatively encouraging was a pickup in construction employment. For a long while now, we've been hoping that government's infrastructural investment programs would finally start being implemented, and one wonders whether this is the first positive sign of a move in that direction. On the negative front, of course, what one sees is a further decline in the country's productive sector, in particular manufacturing, transport and communication, mining and utilities, where virtually no new jobs were created. And that, of course, is an indictment of the and a reflection of the failure of the government's industrialization policies to really take hold? Or is it a reflection of the fact that our educational system is not producing outcomes that are appropriate for providing us with the ability to industrialize and to do manual and technical and engineering type of jobs that are needed?
Yeah. So does this suggest that we're just not getting it right when it comes to the policies that government is instituting, for example, the recovery plan? Or is it really about implementation and also getting the buy-in of business to invest so that more jobs are created?
I think it's a little bit of both. You've got to bear in mind that business is not the one that is at fault in not actually investing sufficiently. The data on fixed capital formation show that business investment is growing much faster, albeit not sufficiently, but growing much faster than investment by the government or state-owned enterprises, which have been in decline. So that is what is actually causing this deindustrialization. The government itself is concentrating more and more of its resources in simply bloating the public service rather than creating infrastructure that can provide goods and services.
How worried are you, Azar, about those people who've been unemployed for the longest time, especially young people who perhaps haven't even had an opportunity to work anywhere, and they're sort of like 27 or 30 years old but have never worked a day in their life?
Of course, that is a huge blight on the economy and its structure. And one sees, for example, that the number of people classified in the 50 who are regarded as inactive as 73%. That was down on 78% a year ago, but it's still huge. And here one questions the role of trade unions in terms of their efforts to limit the entry of a lot of youngsters into the labor market for fear of taking the jobs of the slightly older sections of the population.
What are your thoughts about Kosatu and others deciding to shut down the economy tomorrow, effectively to protest about the very difficult living conditions that we're all experiencing when it comes to higher costs of living and so on and so forth? Do you think that it's an understandable way of protesting, or it actually makes things worse?
Without a doubt, it makes things a lot worse. There's no doubt that people are taking strain, but that strain is not being felt only by the working class. It's being felt by many sections of the population, especially those who have no jobs. And for those who are privileged enough to at least have a job, to be actually abusing that privilege by withholding their labor, I think simply exacerbates the dilemma that we find and the problems that we find in our economy, and is a classic example of why what you see in these latest figures, the productive sides of the economy, where your unionization is at its is the most powerful, is where the least employment has been created.
Yeah, it's very interesting looking at the rest of the world. Countries that previously you wouldn't expect to see so much protest and strikes, it's happening in developed nations as well. It's a broad question, and perhaps one you can't answer very quickly, but do we need to change the way that we do economics right across the board?
Without a doubt, there is a significant fault line in the manner in which the capitalist system globally is functioning. In the manner, what we have been seeing is the rich have been getting richer, and the ordinary man in the street has not seen the benefits of the massive increases in money supply and fiscal expansion that has been invoked by the major industrialized countries of the world over the past years. A lot of the problem lies in the remuneration structure and the way in which the capitalist system is providing incentives to shareholders to ensure that they reward managers for maximizing profit at all costs at the expense of the working class. And there is a tension building up globally in that regard. Unfortunately, the opposite outcome of government controlling everything rather than leaving it to the private sector is also, and has proved to be, ineffective. But it's a significant ideological divide that we are seeing developing in the world as a whole.
Yeah.
And of course in South Africa even more vehemently, between those who are privileged enough to be shareholders and have access to financial and other assets, and your ordinary working class. And the system is not enabling the gap in rewards between the two within each of those segments to actually narrow. If on the contrary, it's exacerbating those divides.
Dr. Azar Jammine, thank you very much for your time and your insights there. He's Chief Economist at Econometrix.